Welcome to Remnant 101 at the City on a Hill Church. I'm Associate Pastor Benji Lalayan. God's remnant recognizes that we are his temple, Jesus is our cornerstone, and mixture is not allowed. We're going to look at a few verses from Paul's ministry beginning in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 through 22. It says, "Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also being built together for a habitation of God in the Spirit." I also want to read 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 through 16, which says, "Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with unbelievers? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, as God has said, 'I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people.'" Now let's start with what we read in Ephesians. Throughout the course of his ministry, Paul has stated in many different ways how having Christ in our lives completes us and makes us new. In this reference, Paul is referring to how our body, our soul, our spirit, our entire being is built like a temple on strong spiritual foundation, being held together by Jesus Christ, who is our temple's chief cornerstone, as it says in verse 20. Now, this temple that Jesus is the reason it holds together so strong is meant to be a spiritual dwelling place for God to be in our lives. In other words, we need Jesus to hold this temple together as our cornerstone so that it remains unbreakable as an eternal dwelling place for our Lord. Now, a lot of Christians do know this, talk about this a lot, because this has to do with allowing Jesus into your life to get closer to God. And this can be seen as another way to view Jesus as the gateway to God. And this, of course, is absolutely true. But as for the verses in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, this applies to that same principle of us being God's temple, but it seems to be the part that gets left out much more often. Yes, Jesus holds the temple together, but what good does that do if God is not dwelling in the temple because of the mixture with unbelievers and idols that Paul was talking about? Now, God is love, of course, but when you spend so much time talking about love while ignoring what 2 Corinthians says about unbelievers and Belial and idols, it doesn't invite unbelievers to believe. It invites them to feel accepted. And that creates the mixture that God does not want to dwell among. If you believe that we are a people who are hastening the coming of Jesus and that we are getting into the ark, that is what we need to be expressing to unbelievers. And there's no compromise, no unequal yoke. As for idols, be reminded that anything in our lives can become an idol if we let it get in the way of what we're doing for God. And don't ever let it get into the back of your mind where it'll say, God will understand this one time, whether it be for work, school, sports, relationships, any kind of engagement, because you never know when each time you work for God, when each time you go to his house, when each time you talk to the man of God will be that time that God does something supernatural in your life. And you don't want to miss that visitation because an idol took precedence even one time, even if it made sense in your mind that God would understand. That still puts the idol in your temple, even for that one little spot, which again, God will not mix with. Jesus holds it together, but it's up to you to keep it clean and ready for God and none else. Then God can really work in your life. God bless you.